Zeus, the ultimate sovereign of the Olympian gods, owes his existence to a primal cycle of fear and prophecy, a legacy of cosmic violence that defines his supreme authority over the Greek pantheon. His birth was shrouded in peril, for he was the sixth and final child of the Titan Cronus and the Titaness Rhea, a couple whose familial relationship was defined by a terrifying, cannibalistic ritual designed to thwart destiny. Cronus, having himself overthrown his own father Uranus, was obsessed with a prophecy that foretold his downfall at the hands of one of his progeny, leading him to swallow each of his children whole immediately after their birth, a gruesome act that claimed Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Rhea, devastated by the loss of her offspring and desperate to save her last child, conspired to deceive her tyrannical consort. When Zeus was born, she secretly spirited him away to the island of Crete, or, in some accounts, to Arcadia, concealing him in a deep cave on Mount Ida, a sacred location protected by the nymphs, the goat Amalthea who nursed him, and the curates, a band of warrior priests who performed loud rhythmic dances and clashed their bronze shields to mask the cries of the infant god from Cronus's distant, fearful ears. This secret upbringing established Zeus's foundational identity. He was the god who survived, the one destined to break the destructive cycle of generational tyranny and usher in a new age of cosmic governance, ultimately defining his character as a vengeful avenger of wrongs and the architect of a structured, though often turbulent, new world order.
Following the utter devastation and victory of the Titanomachy, the three principal Olympian brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, formally agreed to divide the spoils of the universe, casting lots to determine their respective domains in an act that established the foundational hierarchy of the Greek cosmos. Zeus, through either chance or divine manipulation, drew the lot for the sky and the upper air, thereby securing his position as the supreme ruler, presiding over all gods and mortals from his throne atop Mount Olympus, while Poseidon became the master of the seas and earthquakes, and Hades was consigned to rule the gloomy, unseen realm of the underworld and the dead. Although Hades ruled his domain autonomously, Zeus held ultimate authority over all realms, ensuring that his brother's powers ultimately deferred to the king of the gods. This new peace, however, was quickly challenged by the most terrifying monster ever conceived, Typhon, the colossal multi-headed son of Gaia, Earth, and Tartarus, a serpentine beast whose very appearance caused the gods to flee in terror, many transforming themselves into animals and escaping to Egypt. Zeus, refusing to yield his newfound sovereignty, engaged Typhon in a ferocious battle that rattled the entire earth and heavens. Wielding his unstoppable thunderbolts and his adamantine sickle, Zeus fought the beast across mountain ranges, eventually pinning the colossal monster beneath Mount Etna, or Mount Erema in some versions, whose volcanic eruptions were henceforth considered the physical manifestation of Typhon's ongoing rage and struggling attempts to escape his imprisonment. By defeating Typhon, Zeus solidified his martial dominance and confirmed that his rule was not only legitimate through victory over the Titans, but also eternal through the conquest of the Earth's most chaotic and terrifying primal forces, marking the final, decisive step in the establishment of the Olympian regime. Zeus's supreme position was not merely based on his physical strength or his terrifying arsenal of thunderbolts. His power was fundamentally rooted in his role as the ultimate guarantor of justice, Dike, and the custodian of cosmic order, Themis, among gods and men, establishing him as the moral and legal authority of the universe. As the king of Olympus, Zeus presided over the divine council, arbitrating disputes between the gods, enforcing oaths, and meting out punishment, thereby ensuring that the volatile divine family adhered, however loosely, to his established protocol. For mortals, his authority was even more pervasive, extending over all aspects of social, legal, and political life. He was revered as Zeus Zenios, the protector of hospitality and the sacred laws governing the relationship between guest and host, and was feared as the swift, brutal avenger of those who broke these sacrosanct codes, ensuring that even in the absence of human law, divine justice would prevail. Furthermore, he was the final enforcer of oaths, punishing perjury and deceit with exceptional severity, a responsibility that underscored the importance of verbal commitment in the Greek world, and he ruled in conjunction with his daughters, the Moirae, Fates, and the Horae, Seasons and Order, whom he sometimes consulted or whose decrees he upheld, demonstrating that even his supreme power was constrained by the ancient, impersonal force of destiny. This crucial function as the ultimate judge and enforcer of moral law confirmed that Zeus's power was inherently political and ethical. He was the divine source of all legitimate earthly power and the final arbiter whose thunderbolts were reserved not just for monsters and titans, but for anyone, mortal or immortal, who dared to violate the fundamental, underlying principles of cosmic justice and societal order.
Central to Zeus's reign and the drama of the Olympian court was his tempestuous, tumultuous, and politically essential marriage to his sister, Hera, the majestic queen of the gods and the goddess of marriage and childbirth, a relationship that provided the central engine for much of Greek mythology. Although Zeus and Hera often symbolized the perfect, sacred union of the sky, Zeus, and the earth, air, Hera, their marriage was perpetually plagued by Zeus's infamous and insatiable infidelity, which he pursued relentlessly with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women alike, viewing his sovereignty as license for limitless indulgence. This constant stream of affairs, driven by passion, lust, or strategic ambition, inevitably provoked Hera's furious, jealous wrath, transforming her into his primary antagonist, who sought vengeance not against Zeus, but tragically against his numerous lovers and their innocent offspring, such as Io, Callisto, and Hercules. Yet despite the chaos and open conflict, the marriage remained politically intact and ritually essential, as Hera's presence lent legitimacy and stability to Zeus's rule. She was the co-ruler who symbolized the enduring bond of legitimacy and the ordered structure of the family unit, the very institutions Zeus often undermined through his personal actions. This paradoxical dynamic between the king and queen, the sacred bond challenged by the constant acts of betrayal, provided the Greeks with a divine reflection of the complexity of human marriage, power, and jealousy, solidifying Zeus's image not just as a mighty warrior, but as a deeply flawed, emotionally complex sovereign whose personal desires frequently clashed with his divine responsibilities as the upholder of moral order, creating endless narrative drama and tragedy across the Hellenic world. Zeus's pursuit of mortal women stands out not only for its frequency, but also for the ingenious and often manipulative use of metamorphosis and disguise, a power that showcased his mastery over the natural world and his willingness to bend the laws of nature to satisfy his desires. These famous transformations were necessary to bypass Hera's vigilant scrutiny, deceive the women themselves, or simply gain access to them in unexpected and spectacular ways, demonstrating his limitless ability to change his form at will. The most iconic examples include his seduction of Leda, whom he approached in the form of a magnificent swan, an encounter that famously resulted in the birth of Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra, his seduction of Danae, whom he visited by transforming into a shower of radiant golden rain that poured into her sealed prison tower, and his pursuit of Europa, whom he approached as a beautiful, gentle white bull to lure her away across the sea to Crete. These instances of divine disguise were more than mere tricks. They were demonstrations of Zeus's fundamental power to control and inhabit every aspect of the physical cosmos, from the elements, rain, lightning, to the animal kingdom. And these unions with mortals were cosmically significant, as they resulted in the birth of many of Greek's greatest heroes and dynastic founders, including Perseus and Heracles.
By embedding his divine seed into the mortal world through these creative, often spectacular disguises, Zeus established a permanent, active link between Olympus and the human realm, ensuring that his influence was woven into the very genealogy and destiny of the Hellenic civilization, making his infidelity a matter of statecraft as much as passion.
The iconography and sacred symbols associated with Zeus are crucial visual representations of his omnipotent authority, military strength, and celestial dominion, serving to remind mortals and gods alike of his supreme, unchallengeable position. His most potent and universally recognized symbol is the thunderbolt, Cronus, forged by the Cyclops, which he wields as the ultimate weapon of destruction, capable of shaking the heavens and striking down any foe or oathbreaker with devastating finality, symbolizing his mastery over the elemental forces of nature and his role as the ultimate dispenser of divine wrath. Equally iconic is his sacred animal, the eagle, a creature revered for its strength, majesty, and ability to fly higher than all other birds, soaring closer to the celestial dome, and the eagle served as his personal messenger, standard-bearer, and often accompanied him on his throne or in battle, representing his piercing vision and absolute dominance over the upper air. Another critical symbol is the aegis, a terrifying shield or goatskin cloak, often edged with snakes and bearing the severed head of the Gorgon Medusa, a horrific artifact often associated with Athena, but which Zeus originally used, demonstrating his military preparedness and his ability to strike paralyzing fear into the hearts of his enemies. Finally, the oak tree was considered sacred to Zeus, symbolizing endurance, strength, and the deep roots of his authority, particularly at his famous oracle in Dodona, where priests interpreted his will through the rustling of the oak leaves. These symbols were not merely decorative, they were physical manifestations of his power, conveying the awe-inspiring presence of the king of the gods and ensuring that his divine authority was visible, palpable, and perpetually feared across the entire expanse of the Greek world. As the supreme patriarch, Zeus's chief political role was the active governance of Olympus, managing the volatile personalities, competing agendas, and often conflicting powers of the 12 principal gods and the countless minor deities, acting as the ultimate chairman and occasional tyrant of the divine court. The Olympian Council, though fractious, operated under Zeus's direct command. He arbitrated territorial disputes, such as the perennial conflict between Poseidon and Athena over Athens, distributed responsibilities, and, when necessary, employed his formidable will to impose unity and obedience upon the rebellious or recalcitrant members, famously displaying his overwhelming power by chaining Hera from the heavens when she plotted against Heracles. While he valued and often sought the counsel of certain deities, particularly Athena, wisdom, and Themis, justice, the final decision in any matter rested solely with him, a prerogative he reinforced through his ability to issue divine decrees and deploy his thunderbolts as the ultimate sanction. This management ensured that, despite their internal squabbles, the Olympian regime functioned cohesively, maintaining a stable framework for the governance of the cosmos that prevented a return to the chaotic, unpredictable rule of the Titans. Furthermore, the relationships he maintained with the other gods were complex and layered, being simultaneously their sovereign, their father, their brother, and their political ally, all roles that required continuous, delicate balancing of authority, affection, and fear, cementing Zeus's image not just as a thunderer, but as a master strategist and politician, capable of maintaining stability within the most powerful and fractious family unit in all of creation.
Zeus's numerous romantic exploits were not merely acts of personal passion. They were the means by which he fathered nearly all the major second-generation Olympian gods and many of the greatest Greek heroes, making him the absolute divine progenitor of the cosmos's current order. His unions with goddesses were essential for bringing specialized powers into the Olympian fold, such as his children with Hera, Ares, Hephaestus, Hebe, Eileithyia, and his unions with other goddesses like Leto, Apollo and Artemis, and Demeter, Persephone. However, one of his most famous and theologically significant births involved the goddess Athena, the goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts, whose birth myth uniquely underscores Zeus's dominance over intellect and his power to absorb threats to his authority. Zeus had initially married the Titaness Metis, wisdom, but learned from an oracle that Metis was destined to bear a son who would eventually overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Cronus, and Cronus had overthrown Uranus. To preempt this prophecy and end the cycle of overthrow, Zeus resorted to the same method of consumption that had nearly been his ruin. He swallowed Metis whole while she was pregnant. Instead of being overthrown, however, Zeus absorbed Metis's wisdom and intelligence, and later experienced a terrible headache, which was ultimately relieved when the fully armored and adult Athena burst forth directly from his head. This astonishing event cemented Athena's special status as Zeus's favorite child, and the myth served as a profound testament to Zeus's ultimate authority. He alone possessed the power to permanently break the chain of generational regicide, demonstrating that his rule was secured not only by force, but by the successful preemptive integration of all cosmic intelligence and wisdom. Despite his overwhelming power and position as the king of the gods, Zeus's sovereignty was not absolute. It was philosophically and religiously constrained by the ancient impersonal force of fate, Moira, embodied by the three primordial goddesses, the Moirai, Clothos, the spinner, Lachesis, the Elara, and Atropos, the unturnable, who determined the length and destiny of all life, both mortal and immortal. The relationship between Zeus and fate is a central tension in Greek mythology and theological thought. While Zeus had the power to enforce or temporarily manipulate events, such as extending a hero's life or causing a war, he was widely understood to be subject to the ultimate decrees of the Moirai, whose threads of destiny even the king of the gods could not permanently cut or reweave. This philosophical limitation ensured that the Greeks viewed their universe not as being subject to the arbitrary whim of a single god, but to a deeper, unchangeable cosmic law that governed even the divine. In various myths, Zeus is shown consulting the Moirai, or sorrowfully accepting an unchangeable fate, such as the inevitable death of his favorite son, Sarpedon, during the Trojan War, demonstrating that the scope of his power was immense, but not infinite. By acknowledging the power of fate, Zeus legitimized his own rule, confirming that his reign was one of cosmic order, themis, and adherence to fundamental law, rather than simple, brute tyranny, providing the Greeks with a stable, albeit sometimes tragic sense of an ordered universe, where even the highest authority must yield to the ultimate universal decree.
Zeus's authority was actively exercised through his role as the paramount patron of prophecy and the primary source of divine insight, which he disseminated through his famous oracular centers across the Greek world, ensuring that his will was communicated directly to mortal rulers and supplicants. His most ancient and perhaps most important oracle was located in Dodona, in Epirus, a site established in deep antiquity, where the priests, Seloi, would interpret Zeus's will not through human speech, but by listening to the rustling of the sacred oak tree's leaves and the cooing of the doves nesting within its branches, a unique form of divination that emphasized Zeus's immediate connection to the elemental forces of nature, particularly the wind and the sky. This oracle, predating even Delphi's famous Apollo shrine in some regards, was consulted by heroes and statesmen before major wars and decisions, seeking the definitive word of the king of the gods to legitimize their actions.
By sanctioning and presiding over these prophetic centers, Zeus maintained a direct, active line of communication with humanity, allowing him to subtly steer the course of human history, enforce his laws, and warn against impending chaos or impiety. The oracles, therefore, functioned as the ultimate political and spiritual tools of Zeus's rule, ensuring that his influence was woven into the very fabric of Greek decision-making, reinforcing his image as the omniscient sovereign, whose authority was derived not just from his strength, but from his supreme knowledge of the future and his wisdom concerning the proper operation of the cosmic order.
A profound and essential aspect of Zeus's moral authority was his role as the divine protector of the suppliant, Hikiosis, establishing a sacred, inviolable law of sanctuary that offered hope and safety to the most vulnerable members of society, the exiled, the persecuted, and the wrongfully accused. In the rigid, honor-driven society of ancient Greece, a suppliant was an individual who, having lost all human protection, physically entered a sacred space, like an altar or temple, and claimed the direct protection of a specific god, and Zeus was the primary patron and guarantor of this sacred right. To refuse or harm a suppliant who had claimed Zeus's protection was considered one of the most grievous acts of impiety, asibia, a direct and immediate challenge to the authority of the king of the gods, punishable by his swiftest and most brutal thunderbolts. This law of sanctuary placed immense moral pressure on rulers and communities, forcing them to prioritize divine law and compassion over personal grudges or political expediency, demonstrating that Zeus's power was a direct instrument for upholding human rights and mitigating the brutality of tribal conflict. The power of the suppliant's plea, which often involved touching the altar or the knees of a ruler, thus operated as a direct line to the highest divine authority, ensuring that the king of the gods, whose power was symbolized by the violent storm, was also the ultimate source of refuge and inviolable mercy, providing a crucial safety valve within the volatile political landscape of the Hellenic world. Zeus's most immediate and palpable impact on the mortal world was his absolute mastery over weather and atmospheric phenomena, a domain that inextricably linked his celestial power to the earthly cycle of agriculture, fertility, and survival. As the god of the sky and the upper air, Zeus commanded the clouds, the rain, the snow, and the terrifying displays of lightning and thunder, making him the ultimate source of both nourishment and destructive rage. He was widely revered as Zeus Ombrios, the rain-giver, the benevolent force who opened the heavens to provide the crucial, life-sustaining rain that ensured the success of the harvest and the survival of all life, making him an object of constant prayer and petition by farmers and entire city-states during times of drought. Conversely, his thunderbolts and violent storms served as the primary manifestation of his displeasure and divine punishment, capable of laying waste to crops, sinking ships, and incinerating entire temples, reminding mortals of the immense untamed destructive force that always lay latent in the skies. This direct control over the elements placed him at the core of the mortal experience, where every rainfall was a blessing and every sudden storm a warning, confirming that the spiritual health of the community was directly reflected in the behavior of the sky. Thus, the Greeks understood that their very existence was perpetually subject to the whims of the celestial king, whose power was constantly manifested in the dual nature of the sky, the nurturing, life-giving father and the swift, terrifying avenger.
In the later stages of Greek civilization, particularly among philosophers and intellectuals, the figure of Zeus evolved beyond the volatile anthropomorphic deity of myth to represent a more abstract, unifying concept of supreme being and cosmic reason, logos, reflecting an intellectual push toward monotheistic thought. Thinkers like Xenophanes and Plato wrestled with the moral complexities of the traditional myths, especially Zeus's infidelity and cruelty, and attempted to redefine him as the ultimate first cause, the divine intelligence who designed the structured perfection of the universe and was the sole source of all natural and moral law. This philosophical Zeus was less concerned with chasing nymphs and more with upholding the immutable laws of physics and ethics, functioning as the distant, perfect creator whose will was manifested through the order of the cosmos. Furthermore, the Stoic school of philosophy fully embraced Zeus as the embodiment of Logos, the rational, animating principle that pervades all matter, effectively equating the king of the gods with the impersonal, all-encompassing force of destiny and divine providence. This intellectual evolution demonstrates the profound flexibility and durability of the Zeus archetype, allowing him to serve not only as the central figure of popular piety and ritual sacrifice, but also as the sophisticated, foundational concept for Greek metaphysics, confirming his power to unify both the fervent emotionalism of traditional myth and the rigorous demands of abstract philosophical inquiry.
The relationship between Zeus and his powerful brother, Poseidon, the god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, represented the essential and often volatile balance required to maintain the physical stability of the cosmos, frequently marked by periods of tension and outright challenge to Zeus's ultimate authority. Although Poseidon accepted the outcome of the lots that gave him dominion over the seas and was technically subservient to Zeus, his immense power, capable of shaking the earth and raising devastating storms, made him the only god who could pose a genuine existential threat to Zeus's rule, a fact that Zeus was eternally aware of. On several occasions, Poseidon actively rebelled against Zeus's decrees or joined plots against him, most notably in a famous conspiracy with Hera and Athena to temporarily bind Zeus, only to be thwarted by the timely intervention of the Hecatoncures. Despite these conflicts, their partnership was functionally indispensable. Poseidon governed the elemental fury of the seas and the chaotic movements of the earth, acting as the necessary counterpoint to Zeus's domain of the ordered sky, ensuring that all aspects of the physical world were managed by the ruling triumvirate. Zeus wisely reserved his thunderbolts for outside threats, preferring political compromise and subtle coercion over direct fratricidal conflict with his brother, understanding that the unity of the three Olympian brothers was the essential bedrock upon which the peace of the cosmos ultimately rested, confirming that his sovereignty was as much about diplomatic restraint as it was about raw, overwhelming power. Zeus's authority over the cosmos was delineated precisely by his relationship with his somber brother, Hades, the unseen ruler of the underworld and the realm of the dead, a domain over which Zeus exercised influence but not direct sovereignty. Unlike his interactions with Poseidon, Zeus's relationship with Hades was generally one of distant respect and clear jurisdictional boundaries, reflecting the strict, irreversible nature of the laws governing mortality. Hades' realm, often referred to simply as Hades, was considered separate from the Olympian sphere, being neither above nor below Zeus's control in a direct sense, but rather a parallel, permanent reality governed by its own laws, and Zeus rarely intervened in the affairs of the dead, respecting the finality of Hades' judgment. However, Zeus's ultimate authority could occasionally supersede the laws of death, as demonstrated by his allowance for certain heroes, such as Heracles, to enter and exit the underworld alive, or his decree regarding the annual return of Persephone to the surface world to alleviate Demeter's grief. Crucially, Zeus's power as the ultimate judge of the living determined who was sent to Hades' realm. Those who broke the sacred laws were consigned there, making his authority the necessary prelude to Hades' final governance. This functional division of labor established a cosmic order where Zeus ruled the volatile life above and Hades ruled the immutable permanence below, a necessary contrast that cemented Zeus's role as the king of the living and the upholder of the law that defines the absolute separation between the mortal and the eternal.
Zeus's central influence on the mortal world lay in his role as the ultimate source of legitimate kingship, with nearly all great ancient Greek and Macedonian rulers claiming a direct spiritual or often literal genealogical descent from him, establishing a profound belief in the divine right to rule. He was widely revered as Zeus Basileus, Zeus the King, and mortal rulers sought to emulate his justice, authority, and ability to command loyalty, viewing their earthly throne as a direct, though diminished, reflection of his Olympian seat. This divine validation was essential for maintaining power in the political landscape of the Hellenic world. A king's claim to rule was often legitimized by their ability to maintain the cosmic order, Themis, and dispense justice, Dike, in his name, or by claiming Zeus's specific patronage, such as the famous link between Zeus and the kings of Mycenae. In later periods, the Macedonian kings, particularly Alexander the Great, meticulously cultivated an association with Zeus, using the eagle as their standard, and even promoting the belief in Zeus Ammon, a fusion with the Egyptian god, to secure their imperial authority across diverse lands. This theological connection transformed the mere political act of rulership into a sacred duty. A mortal king was essentially Zeus's deputy on earth, and their success or failure was often interpreted as a direct reflection of the god's favor or wrath, confirming that Zeus was the absolute metaphysical cornerstone upon which all human political authority was ultimately grounded.
The epithet cloud-gatherer, Nephelagerites, stands as one of Zeus's most ancient and frequently used titles in Homeric epics, a simple yet powerful linguistic testament to his absolute, literal control over the very structure and visible phenomena of the heavens, cementing his primary domain. This title emphasizes his power to summon, disperse, and control the vast, billowing clouds that cover Mount Olympus and shield the realm of the gods from mortal view, serving both a functional and a symbolic purpose. Functionally, the ability to gather clouds meant he commanded the rain, placing him at the core of human survival and fertility, confirming his role as Zeus Ombrios, rain-giver. Symbolically, the clouds were his primary means of concealment and the manifestation of his majestic, terrifying presence. When Zeus was angered or about to unleash a major decree, the sky would darken, the clouds would gather, and the tension would be palpable, signaling the imminence of the thunderbolt. This perpetual control over the atmosphere ensured that the very sky served as a constant natural reminder of the god of Olympus's power, making his authority the most visibly demonstrated of all the gods. The cloud-gatherer epithet encapsulates the fundamental essence of his divinity. He is the ultimate force of the upper air, the master of the elemental boundary between the earth and the eternal realm of the aether, and the primary controller of the very medium through which all divine communication and wrath are channeled. The strategic power of Zeus was not always expressed through the thunderbolt, but sometimes through his meticulous control over bonds, chains, and imprisonment, a necessary power inherited from his father Cronus, but refined to secure order rather than merely perpetuate tyranny, emphasizing his role as the eternal jailer of chaos. The most profound evidence of this power lies in his alliance with the Hecatonchires, the hundred-handed ones, whom he freed from Tartarus during the Titanomachy. Zeus's ability to free them earned their unwavering loyalty, and he subsequently assigned them the crucial, permanent duty of acting as the undying guards of the imprisoned Titans in the deepest recesses of the underworld. This act solidified Zeus's ultimate authority over the physical restraint of cosmic threats. His rule was maintained not just by his personal strength, but by the immovable, terrifying strength of his allies, who secured the ultimate prison. Furthermore, the myth where the gods plot to bind Zeus himself, only to be foiled by Thetis summoning the Hecatonchires to his aid, illustrates the essential nature of the hundred-handed ones in protecting the supreme power. Zeus's mastery over chains and bonds also extended to minor figures, often using unbreakable chains to punish those who defied his rule, such as the famous binding of Prometheus to a mountain peak.
This aspect of his power confirms that the stability of the Olympian regime relies on the permanent removal and secure binding of all primordial threats, a task for which Zeus is the ultimate and most effective warden.
Zeus's fierce conflict with the clever Titan Prometheus encapsulates the core tension between divine authority and human advancement, defining Zeus's relentless punishment of hubris, overweening pride or defiance against the Olympian order. Prometheus, whose name means forethought, was initially an ally of Zeus in the Titanomachy, but later defied the king of the gods by deliberately attempting to elevate the status of mortals, first by tricking Zeus to accept the less desirable parts of sacrificial meat, and most famously by stealing fire from Olympus and giving it to humanity. This act of blatant disobedience and challenge to divine privilege provoked Zeus's most famous and brutal long-term punishment. Prometheus was chained to a mountain in the Caucasus, where an eagle, Zeus's sacred animal, was sent daily to devour his eternally regenerating liver. This punishment was twofold. It was an act of personal vengeance for the deceit and theft, but also a profound public statement that any attempt to blur the strict, divinely mandated line between gods and mortals would be met with eternal, horrific suffering, serving as a powerful warning against human arrogance. Furthermore, Zeus's retaliation against humanity for Prometheus's crime was the creation of the first woman, Pandora, who was gifted with a beautiful, deceptive charm and carried the jar, or box, containing all the evils, unleashed upon the world as the ultimate countermeasure to the stolen fire. This deliberate act of malice and cosmic counter-strategy confirmed Zeus's ruthless determination to maintain the established cosmic hierarchy at any cost, ensuring that no mortal or titan could ever again undermine the divinely mandated separation between the powerful rulers of Olympus and the subordinate, suffering inhabitants of Earth. Zeus's profound and terrifying capacity for cosmic judgment was manifested in the Great Deluge, the world-ending flood, an event he unleashed specifically to punish the wickedness and impiety of mankind, proving his willingness to destroy his own creation to restore moral order. This act of divine destruction was triggered by the barbarism of the Arcadian king Lycaon, whose notorious wickedness, including acts of cannibalism and human sacrifice, was so offensive to Zeus that the god, disguised as a mortal traveler, personally visited the king's court to test his hospitality and morality. When Lycaon attempted to test the god's omniscience by serving him a meal containing human flesh, Zeus, in a righteous fury, revealed his divine form, instantly transformed Lycaon into a ravenous wolf, and realizing the utter degradation of humanity, decreed that the entire race must be purged by water. He commanded the winds and rain, assisted by Poseidon, to flood the entire world, wiping out all of mankind save for two righteous survivors, Deucalion, Prometheus's son, and his wife Pyrrha, who were saved in an ark. This myth serves as the ultimate narrative confirmation of Zeus's moral authority as the Zeus Katabates, the descender, the god who monitors earthly justice and, when necessary, acts as the devastating executioner of a corrupted civilization. The Deluge myth established a clear theological lesson. Zeus's power was the final, non-negotiable guarantor of Mot, order, and Dike, justice, and his judgment, though terrifying, was ultimately enacted to ensure the survival of the righteous and the renewal of a morally sound civilization.
The most fundamental epithet of Zeus, father of gods and men, pater theon tikai andron, simultaneously expresses his ultimate sovereignty, his genealogical function, and the profound ambivalence of his divine relationship with creation. The title is largely metaphorical, signifying his role as the absolute ruler and protector, the divine patriarch who presides over all life,
yet it also carries literal weight due to his paternity of most of the Olympian council and countless mortal heroes. However, this divine fatherhood was often marked by a terrifying, detached severity rather than simple paternal affection. Zeus would willingly punish or even orchestrate the deaths of his own offspring if they threatened the cosmic order or his personal authority, as seen in his reluctant but necessary sacrifice of Sarpedon, or his deliberate persecution of Heracles through the actions of Hera. This ambivalence showcases the essential difference between divine and mortal morality. Zeus's primary loyalty was not to his family or his personal feelings, but to the cosmic law and the political stability of the Olympian regime, ensuring that his fatherhood was an instrument of governance first and a source of emotional connection second. The father title thus functions as a powerful declaration of his absolute authority. He is the source of all life and the ultimate dispenser of both reward and punishment, confirming that every being, divine or mortal, operates under his ultimate, often stern, and universally recognized dominion. Zeus, the syncretism with Roman and foreign deities, Jupiter. The immense power of Zeus was recognized far beyond the borders of the Greek world, leading to a profound process of syncretism, where his identity was merged with the supreme deities of other cultures, most famously with the Roman god Jupiter, who shared the same core functions: mastery of the sky, the thunderbolt, fulmen, the eagle, and the ultimate position as the guarantor of oaths and justice, Jupiter Lapis. This fusion was so complete that the Roman interpretation absorbed much of Zeus's mythology, allowing the Greek myths to become a central part of Roman cultural and religious life. Furthermore, during the expansion of the Hellenistic and Roman empires, Zeus was also syncretized with Egyptian deities like Amun-Ra, becoming Zeus Amun, particularly in North Africa, where he was depicted with the horns of a ram, emphasizing his kingly and fertile aspects, and with other local high gods across Asia Minor. This continuous, successful merging with foreign deities demonstrates the universal appeal of his archetype. The figure of the ultimate Sky Father, who rules through both power and law, proved to be a necessary theological concept for structuring and legitimating any successful ancient empire, solidifying Zeus's final status not just as the king of Olympus, but as the enduring, adaptable sovereign of the entire Western classical world.
Zeus's divinity was inextricably linked to the Greek experience of the sublime, the feeling of awe, terror, and exhilaration evoked by the vast, untamed power of nature, which he fully personified. His most powerful manifestations were those terrifying, overwhelming natural phenomena: the blinding flash of the lightning bolt, the deafening crash of the thunder, and the vast swirling chaos of the storm cloud, all of which served as immediate, visceral reminders of his unchallengeable presence. When a Greek looked up at a raging electrical storm over the peak of a mountain, they were not witnessing mere weather. They were witnessing the immediate, physical expression of the king of the gods' raw emotional state, whether of divine wrath or sublime power. This connection to the sublime ensured that Zeus's worship was rooted in genuine instinctive fear and reverence, cementing his image as the ultimate force beyond mortal control, yet a force that could be appeased and understood through ritual. By embodying the untamed majesty of the sky, Zeus provided the Greeks with a necessary theological outlet for comprehending the terrifying beauty and unpredictable violence inherent in the natural world, transforming fear into structured religious awe and ensuring that the most majestic and uncontrollable forces of the cosmos remained firmly under the command of a single, recognizable authority. Zeus played a crucial, often overlooked political role in maintaining the spiritual and social unity of the individual Greek city-state, polis, acting as the divine guarantor of its internal laws and communal identity. Within the polis, Zeus was frequently worshipped as Zeus Polios, protector of the city, whose cult was central to the city's defense, its legal system, and its political continuity, often receiving the most important sacrifices during the annual communal festivals. The city's laws and constitutions were viewed as being ultimately sanctioned by him, ensuring that political corruption or civil strife was not merely a secular crime, but an act of profound impiety against the king of the gods, punishable by divine wrath. Furthermore, the highest political and legal authorities within the polis frequently invoked Zeus's name before making solemn decisions or issuing judgments, symbolically grounding their human authority in his supreme, unchallengeable divine sovereignty. This pervasive political patronage ensured that Zeus's power was the ultimate, unifying force across the fragmented Greek world. Though citizens might fight under the banners of Athena or Apollo, the fundamental stability and legal structure of their community relied on the constant, vigilant protection of Zeus Polius, whose authority transcended the local cults and bound the entire political entity into a single, religiously sanctioned order.
Zeus's sovereignty extended beyond war and law to include the patronage of arts, memory, and inspiration, a domain established through his union with the Titanomachy, memory, who bore him the 9 muses, the goddesses of literature, science, and the arts. This mythological parentage is highly significant, asserting that all creative, intellectual, and scientific endeavors ultimately originate from the king of the gods and his perfect memory of cosmic history. By fathering the muses, Calliope, epic poetry, Clio, history, Erato, love poetry, and others, Zeus established a divine link between his celestial authority and the human capacity for inspiration and knowledge, confirming that creative genius is a form of divine grace. The invocation of the muses at the start of any major Greek epic, such as Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, was therefore an indirect prayer to Zeus, acknowledging that true artistic power flowed directly from his lineage. This patronage ensured that Zeus was revered not only by soldiers and statesmen, but also by poets, historians, and philosophers, who recognized him as the divine source of their intellectual tools, reinforcing his image as the complete sovereign whose rule encompassed the entire spectrum of human experience, from the raw force of the thunder to the refined elegance of epic verse. Zeus, the epithet of the champion and the final arbiter of conflict. The image of Zeus as the supreme champion and final arbiter of military conflict, often invoked as Zeus Tropaios, of the rout, or Zeus Nikephoros, bringer of victory, reveals his active, often decisive participation in the martial affairs of gods and men. Unlike his son Ares, who reveled in the brutal chaos of war, Zeus was concerned with the strategic outcome and the preservation of cosmic order, intervening only when a conflict reached a scale that threatened the stability of the Olympian regime, or when a sacred oath had been broken. His intervention was rarely direct combat, but rather subtle, overwhelming influence. He could send omens, shift the weather as he did in the Trojan War, or subtly empower one hero over another, ensuring that the course of battle served his larger strategic goals, often deciding the rout of an army with a single flash of lightning. Furthermore, he was the god who sanctioned the ritualized violence of the Titanomachy and the Gigantomachy, leading the Olympians as their ultimate generalissimo, proving that the king of the gods was also the supreme military commander, whose authority was built upon successful conquest. The altars erected to Zeus after a military victory thus served as the ultimate political and spiritual acknowledgement that all human success on the battlefield was ultimately a gift of divine favor, cementing Zeus's role as the final,
unchallengeable sovereign over all matters of war and ultimate victory. The profound connection between Zeus and the physical majesty of mountain peaks highlights the theophanic nature of his power, the visible, physical manifestation of the divine in the material world, and established mountain tops as his primary sacred sites and places of communion. Mount Olympus itself, perpetually wreathed in clouds and shrouded in mist, was the physical and symbolic anchor of his kingdom, serving as the necessary boundary between the realm of the gods, the aether, and the mortal world below. Beyond Olympus, virtually every major peak in the Greek world, from Mount Lycaon to Mount Ida, held a sacred precinct or altar dedicated to Zeus, reflecting the ancient belief that the highest ground was closest to the sky, and therefore the most direct conduit to the cloud-gatherer. Sacrifices performed on these desolate, wind-swept summits were considered particularly potent, as they placed the mortal supplicant in the immediate presence of the celestial sovereign, whose presence was often announced by sudden, powerful meteorological phenomena. This mountain cult underscores the elemental simplicity of his worship. The grand temples of the city were beautiful, but the true, raw power of Zeus was best encountered in the terrifying solitude of the high peaks, reinforcing his image as the untamed, primordial master of the vertical dimension of the cosmos, whose domain began where mortal breath grew thin and the clouds began to gather.
Zeus's governance extended directly to the predictable, essential cycle of time and nature through his children, the Horae, or hours or seasons, establishing him as the divine guarantor of cosmic order, Themis, and agricultural regularity. The Horae, typically representing the three seasonal divisions of the Greek year, spring, summer, autumn, or winter, were more than just personifications of time. They were the guardians of the gates of Olympus, the figures who ensured that the celestial order was maintained, and that the proper time for planting, harvesting, and resting was observed on Earth. Their mythological existence asserted that the regularity of the natural world, which was absolutely vital for Greek survival, flowed directly from the orderly, rational will of Zeus, whose rule was one of precision and balance. By fathering these goddesses, Zeus solidified his role as the architect of the calendar and the overseer of agricultural prosperity, ensuring that his authority governed the abstract concepts of time as profoundly as it governed the elemental forces of weather. This link to the Horae demonstrates a gentler, more benevolent aspect of his sovereignty, where his power manifests not as terrifying storm, but as the reliable, life-sustaining rhythm of the year, confirming that the king of the gods was fundamentally dedicated to the orderly continuation of life on Earth. Beyond his roles as punisher and judge, Zeus was widely revered as the deliverer, Soter, and protector, Alexikakos, epithets that highlighted his compassionate capacity to intervene directly in human affairs, to provide salvation, healing, and defense against evil, chaos, and disease. This aspect of his worship demonstrated that the formidable king of the gods was also the ultimate source of last resort aid for those facing existential peril, such as sailors caught in impossible storms, armies facing inevitable defeat, or cities plagued by pestilence. Shrines and festivals dedicated to Zeus Soter were common across the Greek world, particularly in ports and during times of civic crisis, where citizens would offer sacrifices and prayers begging for his divine intervention to save them from a threat that surpassed all human capacity to manage. This belief in his salvific power provided a crucial theological balance to his terrifying wrath. While he could destroy cities with a flood, he was also the one who held the power to avert such disasters, confirming that his authority was ultimately benevolent when exercised in defense of the righteous and the ordered state. The invocation of Zeus Soter was the ultimate act of faith, placing the survival of the community entirely in the hands of the supreme celestial power, acknowledging that all deliverance from chaos and calamity ultimately flowed from the sovereign will of the god of Olympus. The physical representation of Zeus in art, particularly in sculpture and coinage, was meticulously crafted to convey his overwhelming power, majesty, and unchallengeable authority, making his image itself an act of spiritual and political communication. The famous lost statue by Phidias at Olympia, imagine the colossal statue of Zeus at Olympia, which depicted him enthroned, holding the scepter, and the winged goddess Nike, Victory, was the ultimate expression of his divine kingship, a benign yet immensely powerful, paternal figure whose very presence commanded silent, absolute reverence. In contrast, many smaller archaic bronze sculptures depicted him in the act of hurling the thunderbolt, his arm raised and his stance dynamic, emphasizing his active role as the swift punisher and warrior. The common presence of his profile on coins throughout the Hellenistic world, often crowned with a laurel wreath and featuring his signature eagle or lightning bolt, served as a powerful declaration of imperial authority, symbolically placing the king of the gods' face on the legal tender of mortal rulers. This careful iconographic management ensured that whether seen in the intimate scale of a personal amulet or the colossal scale of a temple cult statue, Zeus's image consistently communicated his fundamental identity, the supreme ruler, the absolute source of victory, and the embodiment of the majestic patriarchal power that governed both the heavens and the affairs of men.
The law of Xenia, sacred guest friendship or hospitality, was perhaps the most crucial and fiercely protected moral code enforced by Zeus, establishing him as Zeus Xenias, the divine guarantor of reciprocal relationships between host and guest, thereby providing a fundamental ethical structure for travel and diplomacy in the ancient world. This law demanded that a host must welcome and feed any traveler, regardless of their identity, and a guest, in turn, must be respectful and not exploit the host's generosity. The violation of these rules, whether by a stingy host or an impious guest, was considered a direct personal offense against Zeus himself. The myth of Zeus and Hermes visiting the poor but pious couple, Philemon and Baucis, who were rewarded for their boundless hospitality while their impious neighbors were destroyed by a flood, served as the primary narrative confirmation of the swift and catastrophic consequences of breaking this sacred law. This pervasive fear of Zeus Xenios ensured that hospitality became a mandatory, deeply ingrained social custom that facilitated travel and trade across the often fragmented political landscape of Greece, demonstrating how Zeus's moral authority was translated into a necessary practical engine for social cohesion and the prevention of chaos, confirming that the god of the thunderbolt was also the ultimate architect of civil society and human trust. The political structure of Olympus, ruled absolutely by Zeus, stood in perpetual, often complex tension with the emerging democratic and republican political ideals of the Greek city-states, presenting a profound philosophical challenge to mortal governance. While Athenian democracy emphasized the equality of citizens under law and governance by consensus, the divine realm was a strict military autocracy ruled by the unchallengeable will of the king of the gods, whose authority was absolute and hereditary. This contrast forced Greek thinkers to navigate the political paradox. How could a society dedicated to freedom be founded on a religion that placed an unquestioned divine tyrant at its center? The solution lay in viewing Zeus's authority as a necessary metaphorical check on human hubris and a guarantor of the abstract rule of law itself. He was the divine standard of order that prevented the chaos of mob rule or unchecked human ambition. Furthermore, even in democratic states, the laws were ultimately sanctioned by Zeus Peleus, ensuring that the highest form of human freedom was still ultimately accountable to the highest form of divine authority. This philosophical balancing act confirmed that Zeus's power was flexible enough to accommodate, yet fundamentally constrain, the radical political experiments of the Greek world, ensuring that even democracy remained perpetually aware of the superior, necessary structure of divine sovereignty. The thunderbolt, Zeus's signature weapon, served a critical psychological function in the Greek religious imagination, acting as the ultimate instantaneous manifestation of divine wrath and the unchallengeable nature of the Olympian regime.
It was not a weapon of prolonged siege or calculated warfare, but a symbol of immediate, overwhelming finality. A bolt from Zeus was an act of non-negotiable decree, permanently striking down impious mortals, defiant monsters, or objects that had offended the divine order. This speed and finality instilled a profound, perpetual fear that anchored human obedience to the cosmic law. The occurrence of a lightning strike on any object, a temple, a tree, or even the ground, immediately rendered that place an Elysia, a place struck by lightning, transforming it into a sacred, untouchable site, a physical marker of Zeus's instantaneous, terrifying presence. This psychological reliance on the thunderbolt ensured that the king of the gods' power was never abstract. It was a constant, tangible threat that shaped behavior and reinforced the belief that hubris would be met with swift, elemental annihilation, making the thunderbolt the most effective and terrifying instrument of cosmic governance in the entire Greek pantheon.
Zeus's entire domain was metaphysically linked to the concept of light, phos, and the aether, the bright, pure upper air believed to be the dwelling of the gods, establishing him as the primary divine source of celestial illumination, truth, and revelation. As the ultimate sky god, his presence was inseparable from the clear, brilliant light of the upper atmosphere, a contrast to the misty, chthonic darkness of the earth gods, reinforcing his position as the supreme embodiment of reason and order. The thunderbolts themselves, while destructive, were fundamentally bolts of light, making them acts of instantaneous revelation, illuminating the truth and exposing deceit or wickedness. His association with light also lent a spiritual clarity to his pronouncements from the oracles. The word of Zeus was the absolute truth, cutting through the confusion of the mortal world like a ray of pure light. This metaphysical linkage ensured that Zeus was perceived as the ultimate knower, the being who existed in a state of perpetual, unclouded illumination, confirming that his authority was not merely physical dominance, but the supreme mastery of wisdom, clarity, and the highest form of cosmic revelation. While the eagle and the thunderbolt symbolize Zeus's rage and martial authority, the lesser-known yet significant association with the dove and the nurturing forces of life provides a crucial counterpoint to his terrifying majesty, emphasizing his benevolent role as the giver of life and peace. The dove, particularly at the ancient oracle of Dodona, was revered as a sacred messenger of Zeus, and its gentle cooing was interpreted by the priests, contrasting sharply with the terrifying display of lightning. Furthermore, the nymphs and the sacred goat Amalthea, who nurtured him in his infancy on Crete, were themselves gentle pastoral figures, and the myth of his early life emphasizes his necessary reliance on nurturing feminine forces to survive, suggesting a capacity for dependence and protection. This association allows for the portrayal of Zeus as Zeus Eubolos, the good counselor, or Zeus Philanthropos, lover of mankind, revealing the softer, protective side of the celestial patriarch. This subtle duality, the capacity for terrifying destruction balanced by a profound, if rarely seen, gentleness, provided the Greeks with a more complete, navigable deity, ensuring that the king of the gods was not merely a tyrant to be feared, but a complex paternal figure capable of both devastating wrath and life-sustaining mercy.
The epithet, lofty dweller, hypatos, underscores Zeus's inherent connection to the concept of cosmic verticality and his literal dwelling in the highest, most pure stratum of the universe, a geographical position that grants him unique perspective and absolute sovereignty. The Greeks conceived of a cosmos structured vertically, the earth below, the atmosphere, air, and finally the aether, the pure burning air where the Olympians resided. Zeus, residing at the absolute peak of Olympus, was the master of this vertical axis, possessing a comprehensive view of all events below, which was both a physical and a metaphysical reality. This verticality affirmed his unchallengeable authority.
No power could originate from above him, and all power below was necessarily subordinate. Furthermore, this lofty dweller status meant that Zeus's vision was absolute, allowing him to perceive every broken oath, every act of Xenia violation, and every injustice committed on the face of the earth, providing the theological justification for his omniscience and the swiftness of his punitive actions. The invocation of Zeus from a high place, therefore, was an attempt by mortals to physically bridge the vast vertical gap separating them from the supreme sovereign, confirming that his power was defined by his solitary, majestic residence at the unassailable peak of the cosmos. The sacred association of the oak tree, Drus, with Zeus, particularly at the oracle of Dodona, represents the profound symbolism of endurance, strength, and the unyielding permanence of his divine rule, rooting his celestial power firmly in the solid earth. The oak, known for its longevity, resistance to storms, and massive, unmovable trunk, was the perfect terrestrial analog for the king of the gods. It symbolized his ability to withstand the chaotic assaults of the titans and giants and the passage of time itself. The rustling of its leaves, interpreted by the Seloi priests, was seen as the subtle, eternal voice of Zeus, an ancient, constant form of communication that preceded the grand temples and sculpted images. Furthermore, the practice of interpreting the god's will through the sound of the oak reinforced the idea that Zeus's truth was often hidden in the simplest, most enduring forms of nature, requiring piety and deep concentration to discern, contrasting sharply with the overt, terrifying visual of the thunderbolt. This chthonic link, which connected the sky god to the oldest and strongest tree of the earth, solidified Zeus's sovereignty over both the volatile, fleeting heavens and the slow, immutable forces of the earth, proving his dominance extended across the entire physical and metaphysical spectrum of the cosmos.
The scepter served as Zeus's essential, non-violent symbol of legitimate and enduring kingship, complementing the terrifying martial nature of the thunderbolt and representing the sober authority of the throne. Depicted universally in art as a long, ornate staff, often topped with the image of the eagle, the scepter was not used for combat, but was held by Zeus when enthroned, signifying his right to rule by established decree and inherited authority. Its presence was a visual affirmation that his power was not merely transient strength, but a formal, institutionalized sovereignty that transcended the chaos of war, relying on law and recognition. When the Olympic Games were inaugurated, the statue of Zeus holding the scepter symbolized the sacred truce, confirming that the peace and order of the world flowed from his formal, legitimate command, a power that held the warring city-states in temporary check. This emphasis on the scepter underscores a key political nuance. Zeus's supreme rule was not merely a dictatorship enforced by fear, but a structured monarchy acknowledged by the entire divine and mortal world, confirming that the stability of Olympus rested equally on the devastating might of the thunderbolt and the sober, formal authority of the scepter. Zeus's relationship with humanity was solidified not just through his numerous amorous adventures, but through his ultimate decision to allow the creation and development of mankind, a process often tied to the Titan Prometheus and the intervention of other gods, but ultimately sanctioned by the king of the gods. While the myths vary on whether Prometheus molded man from clay or whether man arose spontaneously, Zeus was the sovereign who granted man the crucial condition of existence and ultimately decided the rules of their mortal lives. The pivotal moment was Zeus's decision to allow the theft of fire to go unreversed, accepting the fate that humanity would possess technology and consciousness, though he brutally punished Prometheus for the audacity of the act. This grudging acceptance established the core tension of the Olympian age, a dynamic where mankind, though fundamentally subordinate and mortal, possessed a divine spark, the gift of consciousness and technology that perpetually tested the limits of Zeus's patience and the boundaries of the divine-mortal divide. Zeus, therefore, became the divine monitor of human progress, ensuring that man's intellectual advancement did not lead to a level of hubris that would threaten the stability of the cosmic hierarchy, reserving the ultimate punishment, like the Great Deluge, for those moments when human consciousness led to intolerable moral degradation. As Zeus Horkios, guarantor of oaths, Zeus served as the silent, terrifying divine witness during the most solemn and legally binding human ceremonies, establishing his authority as the unchallengeable foundation of all legal and moral integrity in the Greek world. In a culture where written contracts were often secondary to spoken vows, the oath taken in the name of Zeus was considered the most potent bond. The ritual typically involved the physical sacrifice of an animal and the verbal declaration of the oath, often accompanied by a prayer explicitly calling upon Zeus to destroy the oath-breaker with his thunderbolt. The fear of incurring the wrath of Zeus Horkios was the primary deterrent against perjury, ensuring that even the highest levels of political and judicial corruption were theoretically held in check by the threat of divine annihilation. This power made him indispensable to diplomacy and war. Treaties between city-states were always sealed with an oath to Zeus, transforming a political agreement into a sacred religious contract. Thus, the power of Zeus was constantly present in every public and private transaction that required trust, confirming that the king of the gods was not merely a cosmological ruler, but the essential ethical anchor of human legal and social cohesion, whose silent, watching presence was the ultimate guarantor of truth and commitment.
In a final, metaphysical sense, Zeus's power was often equated by philosophers and mystics with the universal soul, or the cosmic fire, the ultimate animating energy that pervaded and ordered the entire universe, linking his supreme authority to the very fabric of existence. This interpretation moved him beyond his anthropomorphic form and martial epithets, viewing him as the pure, uncreated force that gave rise to all subsequent creation and maintained the geometric and astronomical precision of the cosmos. For the Stoics, who were deeply influential in the later classical world, Zeus was the logos, the divine reason that ordered reality, ensuring that every event, every motion, and every natural law operated under a single rational principle. This concept removed the capricious passions of the mythological Zeus, replacing them with the cold, perfect logic of cosmic governance, demonstrating that even the most emotionally charged god could be re-envisioned as the ultimate, impersonal lawgiver. This metaphysical evolution cemented Zeus's status not just as a figure of myth, but as a foundational concept in Western philosophy, ensuring that his power remained eternal by transforming him into the very abstract principle of order itself. The enduring legacy of Zeus, the king of Olympus, is defined by his comprehensive mastery over all essential aspects of the cosmos, a sovereignty established through cataclysmic war and maintained through shrewd political and ethical governance, making him the most complete and recognizable divine figure in Western history. From the primal chaos of the Titans to the ordered hierarchy of the Olympians, Zeus acted as the relentless enforcer of order, Themis, and justice, Dike, using his terrifying thunderbolt as the ultimate instrument of his will, while simultaneously serving as the source of all legitimate kingship, prophecy, and civil law on earth.
His mastery of metamorphosis, his strategic use of alliances like the Cyclopes and Hecaton cheers, and his final, often brutal defense of the human-divine separation all underscore a power that was absolute yet constrained by the larger impersonal force of fate. Whether revered as the cloud-gatherer, the protector of suppliants, or the philosophical embodiment of cosmic reason, Zeus remains the quintessential archetype of the supreme, majestic patriarch whose rule defined the ancient world and whose powerful, volatile presence continues to shape human understanding of authority, power, and the complex relationship between mankind and the divine. Zeus's mythology serves a profound tragic function in Greek literature and ethics, acting as the divine figure whose relentless punishment of hubris provides the central warning to all mortals regarding the dangers of unchecked ambition and the necessity of piety. The sheer frequency with which Zeus struck down individuals, whether for boasting of greater beauty than the gods, attempting to steal divine secrets, or violating the sacred laws of Xenia, created a cultural narrative that instilled deep caution and respect for the boundaries separating the human and divine realms. The most common motif is the hero who achieves immense success, begins to believe his accomplishments are solely his own, and inevitably attracts the nemesis, divine retribution, of Zeus, leading to a spectacular, often catastrophic downfall. This tragic structure, pervasive in Greek drama and epic poetry, established a clear, non-negotiable moral boundary. Mortality must always recognize and respect the supreme, unchallengeable power of the celestial king. Zeus's brutal but consistent application of this punishment ensured the stability of the cosmic order, demonstrating that the maintenance of the hierarchy was more important than any individual life, providing the ultimate, severe ethical lesson for the entire Hellenic civilization.
Zeus's power was also expressed through the aesthetic of awe, manifesting his sovereignty through the creation and sanctioning of physical beauty and majesty, which served to inspire mortal reverence and devotion. The description of Zeus's own appearance, magnificent, bearded, muscular, and radiating a benevolent yet terrifying presence, established the visual standard for divine patriarchal beauty in the Greek world, making his form the archetype of all subsequent artistic representations of sovereign power. Furthermore, the divine beauty of his children, such as Apollo, Aphrodite, and Artemis, physically linked the king of the gods to the most aesthetically pleasing aspects of the cosmos. The colossal statues and the magnificent temples dedicated to him, such as the temple of Olympian Zeus, were architectural manifestations of his vast power, designed to inspire religious awe through sheer scale and artistic perfection. By commissioning or inspiring such works, Zeus ensured that his authority was not just feared but actively celebrated through the human creation of sublime art, transforming the terrifying raw force of the thunderbolt into a majestic, beautiful form that affirmed the inherent goodness and order of the Olympian regime.
The successful rise and exploits of nearly all the greatest Greek mortal heroes, Heracles, Perseus, Minos, and the founders of major dynasties, were directly dependent on the favor, intervention, or parentage of Zeus, cementing his role as the ultimate patron and guarantor of human greatness. Heracles, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, represents the purest example. His immense strength and his ability to complete his 12 labors were ultimately sanctioned by his divine father, who often intervened to save him from the vengeful wrath of Hera. These heroes served a critical theological function, acting as the physical link between the divine and mortal realms, carrying out Zeus's will on earth, clearing out monsters, and establishing the moral order. Their mortal greatness, though often tragic, provided proof of Zeus's power and benevolence, demonstrating that the king of the gods actively invested in humanity to secure the cosmic order against chaos. This interdependence was essential. Zeus needed the strength of heroes like Heracles to defeat the giants, and the heroes needed Zeus's divine spark and protection to achieve their legendary status, confirming that the glory of man and the sovereignty of Olympus were forever bound together by the will of the king. In a final synthesis of his immense power, Zeus remains the ultimate metaphor for the unstoppable will, the divine force that overcomes all obstacles, breaks all chains, and establishes a stable cosmic order where none existed before. His entire mythic journey, from his secret survival on Crete to his final victory over Typhon and the giants, is a narrative of persistence and absolute decisive action, proving that the chaos of the old world could be defeated only by the singular, unyielding will of the king. The awe that Zeus inspired in the Greeks was not the quiet reverence given to the earth gods, but the visceral, existential terror of confronting a power that had irrevocably shaped the sky, exiled its predecessors to Tartarus, and maintained its rule through the single, terrifying crack of the thunderbolt. This terrifying, unyielding quality ensures that Zeus is not merely a ruler, but the embodiment of necessary sovereign power itself, the entity who defines the boundary between order and annihilation, and whose will remains the absolute, final law of the entire universe. The enduring historical and cultural significance of Zeus transcends the decline of the ancient cults, establishing his figure as the foundational archetype of the supreme sovereign in the Western political and theological imagination, ensuring his legacy survived through the Roman Jupiter and beyond. His core attributes, the Sky Master, the Supreme Judge, the Keeper of Cosmic Law, and the ultimate source of legitimate earthly power, were successfully absorbed and perpetuated by subsequent monotheistic concepts of divinity and political theory. The classical figure of Zeus provided the world with the first fully realized model of a single, all-powerful patriarchal ruler who managed a complex, often rebellious divine court while actively monitoring and judging the moral affairs of mankind, a structure that influenced later conceptions of divine governments. Even when the official worship ceased, the philosophical understanding of Zeus as the Logos, or the first cause, continued to shape rationalist and Stoic thought, maintaining his presence in the abstract realm of metaphysics. Thus, the king of Olympus ultimately stands as a powerful testament to the human need for a singular, majestic authority capable of imposing and enforcing order upon a chaotic world, confirming that his reign, established through the thunderous overthrow of the Titans, remains eternally relevant as the central pillar of sovereign authority and cosmic structure.
The vast body of Zeus's mythology serves a crucial aetiological function, providing the Greeks with divine explanations for the origins and inherent nature of fundamental natural phenomena, human social structures, and the founding of their greatest lineages. The crash of thunder was not merely a physical event, but the immediate, audible voice of the god. The dry season was often the result of his displeasure or a temporary withdrawal of his favor, and the establishment of the sacred truce during the Olympic Games was a direct consequence of his will, not human political agreement. Furthermore, his numerous metamorphoses and unions with mortals were the divine mechanisms used to explain the geographical origins of places, like Europa giving her name to the continent, and the genealogical roots of powerful families, ensuring that the history of the world and the history of mankind were perpetually anchored in his divine actions. This role as the ultimate explainer of cause and effect meant that every significant event, whether celestial or terrestrial, could be traced back to the sovereign decree or intervention of the king of the gods, confirming that Zeus was the ultimate source of all knowledge and the central interpretive key to understanding the seemingly random events of the natural and mortal realms.
The mythic journey of Zeus, from the infant hidden in the Cretan cave to the supreme sovereign of the aether, culminates not merely in the victory of the thunderbolt, but in the acceptance of the supreme, crushing burden of absolute knowledge. a burden that defines his rule as both magnificent and profoundly solitary. Having subdued the Titans, chained the giants, and enforced the iron law of Xenia across the mortal realm, Zeus faced a final existential challenge not of strength, but of metaphysical endurance. It is said that in the deep, silent core of Mount Olympus, far beneath the council hall, lies a chamber older than the Titanomachy, guarded by the three Titanomachy themselves, a place where the banished spirits of cosmic doubt, aporia, and primal memory, anamnesis, were eternally confined. One day, weary of the ceaseless feuds of the Olympian demos and restless with the certainty of his unchallengeable power, Zeus descended into this abyss to confront the limits of his own omniscience. The formless spirit of aporia presented the king of the gods with the ultimate test: a single black urn of absolute foresight, containing not the glorious future, but the inevitable eventual end of the Olympian age, the rise of the machine, the long sleep of the gods, and the final dissipation of their very memory into dust. Zeus gazed into the urn, seeing not only the destruction of Troy, the slow decline of the polis, and the rise of Rome, his own Jupiter form, but the ultimate moment when the last mortal voice would cease to utter the name of the cloud-gatherer, and the very aether would cool into silence. Instead of shattering the urn or destroying Aporia in a terrified rage, Zeus simply closed the vessel, his face heavy with the terrifying truth of cosmic ephemerality, and ascended back to his throne. He chose not to fight the end, but to guarantee the perfection of the present order until the last tick of the celestial clock, knowing that the stability he imposed was not eternal, but necessary. His final act of sovereignty was not a display of force, but a silent, paternal acceptance of the limits of his own divine existence, confirming that the true measure of his kingship was his willingness to bear the foreknowledge of his own eventual demise for the sake of the now. And as he returned, his mind burdened with the vast, unalterable sweep of time, he declared the ultimate truth that defines all sovereignty, both mortal and divine. The true power of the king is not the force of the thunder, but the relentless weight of the future known. And the greatest burden of the Aether is this: to know the inevitable end, yet choose to decree order until the final, forgotten breath.